What if the most crucial battle of a war detonated far from the front lines, without a single soldier, gunshot, or tank in sight? Imagine the world's attention fixated on a distant, nondescript dot on a map. No medals are won here, no grand speeches given, no war correspondents racing to capture heroics. And yet, the fate of entire armies might hinge on what happens in this forgotten place. A place few can pronounce, let alone find. This is the paradox of modern warfare. Sometimes the quietest point on the map becomes the loudest echo in history. Picture a razor-sharp strike deep within enemy territory. No generals targeted, no barracks destroyed. Instead, the crosshairs locked onto a remote railway junction, an unremarkable spot, ignored by most, but for those who know logistics, it is the beating heart of the war effort. This was Operation Steel Paralysis. It did not thunder through muddy trenches or sweep across armored columns. Instead, it quietly snapped the secret lifelines that powered the enemy's war machine. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. A chain reaction tore through the enemy's entire supply web. Ammunition, fuel, rations, fresh troops, all stranded, all halted mid-journey. The front, hundreds of kilometers away, suddenly began to choke. In modern war, if you overlook logistics, you risk defeat before the first shot is fired. Today's victory hinges less on masses of troops and more on who commands the invisible arteries of supply that pulse behind the scenes. Let us uncover how this unseen war unfolded and why a single silent attack on a forgotten rail junction rewrote the rules of 21st century conflict. The story of Operation Steel Paralysis begins not on a battlefield, but in the dim light of a military intelligence office. Here, a handful of analysts discovered the one weak link that would change everything. The true engine of modern warfare is not the roar of tanks or the thunder of artillery. It is the relentless hum of supply. Behind every bold advance and desperate stand, an unseen legion toils. Fuel convoys, ammunition trains, and repair teams, each as essential as any frontline hero. Victory is not just won by courage under fire, but by the steady pulse of logistics that keeps every trigger ready and every vehicle fueled. To understand this, consider the lessons of history. Throughout the Second World War, the Allies' ability to maintain the Red Ball Express, a fleet of thousands of trucks ferrying supplies across France, was as decisive as any tank battle. In the Korean War, the United Nations forces' ability to keep the Pusan perimeter supplied, despite being nearly surrounded, made all the difference. Even in ancient times, Hannibal's legendary crossing of the Alps became a logistical nightmare, with his army starving and freezing before ever engaging Rome's legions. The story repeats. Those who master supply win wars. Those who neglect logistics court disaster. We like to picture war as a contest of valor and firepower, but reality is far less romantic. It is logistics, those endless lines of rail cars, rivers of fuel, and mountains of spare parts that determine who prevails. These supply arteries are the lifeblood of an army. Sever them, and even the strongest force withers, regardless of how many soldiers it commands. This truth became impossible to ignore at Shipyatovka, a modest railway junction lost in a sea of anonymous countryside. On most maps, it was barely a dot. Yet, in the summer of 2025, Shipyatovka carried almost all Western military aid destined for the Eastern Front, close to 9/10 of every tank, artillery piece, and most importantly, every shell. Shipyatovka was more than a waypoint. It was a colossal sorting heart. Massive westbound trains were broken down, reassembled, and dispatched toward three critical battlegrounds: Kupiansk, Donetsk, and Zaporizhia. The tempo of the entire war depended on this hidden hub running without a hitch. Beneath its corrugated roofs and camouflaged sheds, warehouses brimmed with fuel, high-value weapons, and provided rapid repairs to battered vehicles. To put this in perspective, think of the famous railheads of Stalingrad during the Second World War. When German supply lines were stretched and the Soviets targeted key junctions, entire divisions starved of ammunition and fuel, unable to press their advantage. Or recall the Allied bombing campaigns against German rail networks in 1944, which ground panzer movements to a halt before the Normandy breakout. Shypiatovka, in 2025, served a similar role. Its loss would mean paralysis. The real targets were not glamorous command centers or frontline outposts. They were the mundane, often ignored webs of rails, switches, power substations, and buried depots, vital, brittle, and nearly invisible. Destroying Shypiatovka would not just create temporary chaos. It threatened a total unraveling, collapsing the logistical backbone that held the front together. The stakes could not be higher. Break the supply chain, and even the bravest army cannot hold. Valor and numbers mean nothing when bullets run dry and engines sputter in empty silence. In wars like this, true victory belongs to those who can see and strike at the enemy's hidden lifelines. The minds who reveal and target the quiet machinery that keeps armies alive. Which raises a chilling question. How do you uncover and destroy the invisible heart of an enemy's entire war machine? If you want to cripple your enemy, you must first find the place they cannot afford to lose. For the planners of steel paralysis, that search began with a single, overlooked junction. This was no haphazard guesswork. It was a masterclass in reconnaissance and infiltration, tailored for the age of precision warfare. Operation Steel Paralysis began not on the battlefield, but in the silent, windowless rooms where intelligence officers bent over glowing screens. Success was cultivated over weeks, not hours, as experts pieced together the enemy's logistics labyrinth, assembling a map the defenders never knew existed. The operation's backbone was an unblinking eye in orbit. For more than a month, high-resolution satellites swept over Shypiatovka, tracking every movement. Each train snaking through the yards, every shift in cargo on a siding, the smallest change in stockpiles of fuel or shells, nothing escaped these watchful sentinels. They captured patterns invisible from the ground, exposing the rhythms and vulnerabilities of the supply hub. But satellites alone could not pierce every veil. Enter the Shadow Fleet. Radar-laden aircraft flying perilous routes just outside enemy reach. Their synthetic aperture radars sliced through fog, darkness, and camouflage. They mapped out hastily dug shelters, fresh anti-aircraft batteries, and the ghostly outlines of supply convoys slipping in at dawn. Every pass filled in another blank on the planner's map. Yet even this high-tech web had holes. Signals intelligence teams picked up the slack, eavesdropping on radio traffic, station announcements, and encrypted bursts of data. Each intercepted message hinted at new routines, emergency reroutes, nervous updates, the defenders' improvisations. By triangulating chatter, the analysts spotted cracks in the enemy's composure, learning which assets were being moved, which were being guarded, and where mistakes were starting to show. Still, the most vital truths came from a single human source. Deep inside Shypiatovka, a lone agent risked everything to feed back secrets. The true layout of underground bunkers, hidden access tunnels, the precise schedules of key personnel. Their reports filled in what no sensor could see, the things locked behind steel doors and routine. This human element cannot be overstated. In the Second World War, the French resistance helped the Allies map German supply movements, allowing pinpoint sabotage. In the Gulf War, local informants revealed the location of Iraqi fuel depots, making airstrikes exponentially more effective. At Shypiatovka, the courage of a single agent enabled a digital and kinetic strike with devastating effect. Slowly, a mosaic emerged. Planners identified 4 targets whose elimination would cripple the entire supply system: the vital railway bridge, the digital heart of the station's control center, the power substation that kept the tracks alive, and the buried depots of fuel and ammunition. Each target was chosen for its irreplaceability and its capacity to set off cascading failure across the enemy's logistics. Without this relentless, multi-layered intelligence, every source checked and cross-checked, the operation would have been blind. The defenders were practiced, their routines drilled, their deception sophisticated. Only by weaving together these streams of insight did the attackers glimpse the fragile skeleton beneath the enemy's power. Now, with the target's secrets laid bare, the stakes shifted. The challenge became one of execution, transforming perfect information into a decisive blow where each second and each circuit mattered. The planners had their targets, but now came the moment of truth, turning intelligence into a precision attack under the enemy's watchful eyes. The countdown to the strike had begun. The critical moment arrived not with the roar of tanks or the clash of infantry, but with a silent storm of precision. The first assault was a ballet of drones and decoy missiles flooding the skies above Shipiatovka. Each decoy forced the defenders to light up their radars, exposing every hidden battery in their desperate bid to protect the junction. Within minutes, the defenders' guns barked ceaselessly. Missile after missile arced skyward, burning through precious reserves. By the time the last interceptor launched, their positions and radar signatures were fully revealed, leaving them defenseless for what was to come next. Anti-radar missiles arrived in quick succession, homing in on the newly exposed sensors. The network that should have shielded this logistical hub went blind in a matter of seconds. For one heartbeat, the skies above Shipiatovka stood eerily clear, just long enough for the main assault to begin. Then came the hammer blows. Iskander ballistic missiles, guided with surgical precision, slammed into two vital targets: the railway bridge spanning the Gusko River and the command and control center at the heart of the junction. Both were struck almost simultaneously, the impacts timed to maximize chaos. The bridge, Shipiatovka's main artery, vanished in a burst of fire and shrapnel, its twisted remains collapsing into the river below. At the same instant, the command center erupted in flame and splintered concrete, silencing all coordination. No new orders could be sent, no trains rerouted. The brain of the operation was simply gone. But the offensive was not over. Caliber cruise missiles swept in low, hugging the contours of the land to evade any surviving defenses. Some struck the power substation that fed the entire rail grid. In a heartbeat, the station and its sprawling yards were plunged into darkness. No lights, no signals, nothing but chaos. Other calibers hunted the hidden ammunition and fuel depots. The explosions that followed were apocalyptic, igniting months' worth of stockpiled shells and diesel. Black smoke curled into the sky for miles, punctuated by secondary blasts as fire ripped through dozens of tanks and warehouses. Drones returned, relaying grim images. The bridge shattered, the command center a ruin, every depot a raging inferno. The steel heart of the enemy's logistics system had stopped beating. Nothing moved, no trains, no trucks, not even a single figure dared to cross the ruined span. Shockwaves rippled outward. Trains loaded with artillery shells and spare parts ground to a halt, stranded far from the front. Repair shops went silent. Artillery crews began rationing every shell. On every line, soldiers watched their dwindling supplies with growing dread, realizing that help would not arrive. This was the true gamble of logistics warfare. When supply lines break, whole sectors can collapse in hours. The timing had to be perfect. A moment too early, and the enemy could adapt. A moment too late, and the chance would slip away. At Shipiatovka, every move landed with unerring precision. Now the world watched the aftermath. Would the defenders recover, or had the heart of their war machine been cut out for good? A single operation sent shockwaves rippling across the map, reshaping the war in ways few could have predicted. With one strike, the destruction of Shipiatovka's railway junction triggered a chain reaction that reverberated far beyond the immediate blast. The enemy's supply network, once steady and reliable, was thrown into utter confusion. Restoring alternate routes would take between 2 and 3 weeks, an eternity in a war where every sunrise brought fresh dangers and shifting front lines. Russian commanders seized the initiative without hesitation. Within 3 days, they launched a new offensive, this time in a completely unexpected sector. Ukrainian defenders, confident their rear was secure, were suddenly caught off guard. Ammunition dumps and fuel depots ran dry, and supply convoys broke down, stranded dozens of miles behind the fighting. Cut off, running low on essentials, many Ukrainian units could not hold. Some retreated, others were overrun. In just 10 days, Russian troops surged ahead by as much as 40 kilometers, a tempo not seen since the chaotic opening of the war. But the setback was more than lost territory. The psychological toll proved devastating. Isolated from support, radios filled with static, and roads to the rear eerily empty, defenders lost more than their positions. They lost their sense of unity. Fear spread, discipline frayed, and entire sectors began to unravel. The front did not merely bend, it splintered, leaving inviting gaps for the enemy to exploit. Consider the historical parallel of the German Ardennes offensive in 1944, where Allied logistics, already stretched by autumn mud and destroyed bridges, nearly failed to prevent a catastrophic breakthrough. Or the Sinai campaign of 1956, where Israeli paratroopers seized critical passes, choking Egyptian supplies and triggering rapid collapse. In each case, the sudden paralysis of logistics had outsized effects. Operation Steel Paralysis did not earn its place in history through the size of its explosions or the body count. It became legendary as a masterstroke of indirect warfare, victory achieved not by headlong assault, but by severing the arteries that kept the war machine alive. In the end, a single, flawlessly timed operation brought more disruption than weeks of costly grinding battles ever could. Hesitate, and your enemy recovers. Strike at the right moment, and you can redraw the entire battlefield. But the lesson was not just military. The operation forced strategists everywhere to confront a harsh truth. Wars are won and lost on invisible supply lines. The next great war may hinge not on a firefight atop a hill, but on the silence that falls inside a warehouse. Imagine a battlefield where the loudest victory is not the roar of artillery, but the sudden standstill of an enemy supply convoy, halted by a single missing bridge or a shattered junction far from the front lines. Operation Steel Paralysis in the autumn of 2025 proved this truth. It was not the number of boots trudging through the mud, but the control of fuel, ammunition, and spare parts that decided who advanced and who stood frozen. The destruction of the Shipyatovka railway hub, a target once dismissed as secondary, crippled the entire logistics backbone of the Eastern Front. One precision strike reached deep into enemy territory, severing the arteries that fed the war machine, and showing that wars today are won in the shadows of supply lines, not just in the blaze of combat. For decades, military legends have glorified courage and sacrifice at the front, painting victory as a contest of willpower and brute force. But the truth is colder and far more calculated. The side that commands the flow of resources, the movement of fuel, the delivery of shells, and the repair of machines sets the rhythm of the fight. Real power lies with those who can make enemy tanks run dry and their guns go silent. Ignoring logistics is not just a tactical error, it is a fatal strategic flaw. Failing to respect the silent strength of supply lines risks losing a war before the first shot is ever fired. The invisible chess match of logistics and intelligence is what truly decides the fate of nations. Clinging to outdated ideas about what wins wars means repeating old mistakes, but now with far greater consequences: wasted time, lost lives, and shattered sovereignty. So next time you hear talk of military might, remember, the real battle may be raging in a cramped control room, a humming data center, or a dimly lit warehouse. Those who master the flows behind the scenes are the ones truly shaping history. Let's crystallize this lesson through practical steps any modern military must take to avoid Shipyatovka's fate. First, diversify supply routes. Relying on a single junction or corridor is an engraved invitation to disaster. The Allies in the Normandy campaign built the famous Mulberry harbors, artificial ports, to maintain supply even if French harbors were destroyed. Modern militaries must invest in redundant rail links, highways, and even temporary pontoon bridges, ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. Second, camouflage and decentralized stockpiles. The Germans in the Second World War dispersed their fuel depots and disguised them as civilian structures to evade Allied bombers. Today, using decoy warehouses, underground bunkers, and frequent relocation of supplies can confuse enemy intelligence and increase the survivability of critical assets. Third, ensure rapid repair capabilities. After the Battle of Kursk, Soviet engineers restored destroyed railways in record time, sometimes laying kilometers of track overnight. Modern armies should train specialized logistical units capable of reconstructing bridges and tracks under fire, using modular bridge sections and prefabricated railway components. Fourth, invest in real-time situational awareness. The defenders at Shipyatovka were outmaneuvered not because of a lack of bravery, but because the attackers had a complete, minute-by-minute picture of the logistical network. Widespread deployment of drones, sensors, and encrypted communication lines is now as vital as tanks and artillery. Fifth, embrace the power of deception. The Soviets famously used maskirovka, military deception, to hide their true intentions and assets. Modern defenders should employ electronic warfare, fake radio traffic, and simulated supply movements to mislead and overload enemy intelligence. Finally, never underestimate the human factor. The lone agent at Shipyatovka provided details no satellite could see. Investing in counterintelligence, maintaining morale among rear-area troops, and fostering a culture of vigilance can prevent catastrophic leaks. Consider a scenario. If the defenders had anticipated the vulnerability of Shipyatovka, they might have rerouted a portion of their supplies days before the strike, depriving the attackers of a single, lucrative target. Alternatively, if their engineers had contingency plans and equipment stationed nearby, they might have restored the bridge or constructed a bypass within days, blunting the impact and regaining the initiative. Compare this to the Soviet experience at Stalingrad, where the loss of the last supply ferry across the Volga River doomed the defenders. Or look to the Yom Kippur War, when Israeli supplies ran perilously low until an emergency airlift turned the tide. The lesson is clear. Logistics is not just support, it is the front line. In the digital age, the stakes are even higher. Cyber attacks can paralyze control systems, and an enemy with superior intelligence can disrupt not just physical flows, but the very data that controls them. A well-timed hack or data leak can cause as much chaos as a missile. The modern commander must think not just in terms of bombs and tanks, but in ones and zeros, in bits and bytes, as much as in bullets and shells. Ultimately, Operation Steel Paralysis reminds us that warfare is not a series of isolated battles, but an interconnected web of actions and reactions. Each supply train, bridge, and warehouse represents a node in this web. Cut the right strand, and the whole structure may collapse. The invisible war for logistics will decide the next century's conflicts. Commanders who adapt, who see the battlefield as a network of flows and vulnerabilities, will shape the outcomes. Those who cling to old images of war, of glorious charges and heroic last stands, will find themselves outrun, outmaneuvered, and ultimately outsupplied. The next time you watch a news report on a distant war, do not just count the tanks and soldiers on the front line. Ask yourself, who controls the train yards, the refineries, the bridges, and the silent data streams in the rear? That is where the real contest is decided. That is where history turns. So, what if the most crucial battle happens in the shadows, far from the guns and the headlines? Perhaps, as Operation Steel Paralysis shows, it always has. The silent war behind the lines is the one that truly changes the course of history, for those who see it and for those who never knew it had begun.